Hi everyone, Gene Richards here again, attorney from the Williams Law Group, back on the Navigating DCP&P podcast, the podcast where we break down complex issues involving the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, or DCP&P. Today's episode is called Life After TPR, Putting the Child First. As a reminder to all of you listening, any information that I share on this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. But we do welcome any person involved with DCP&P to contact our office for a confidential consultation with our team. In segment 1 of our TPR episodes, we discussed court standards when and how TPR happens. We discussed that the court has to consider the best interest of the child, right? Every case is guided by the principle that the child's safety, stability, and well-being come first. Now, of course, the court must also weigh parental rights, mom, dad, and their rights as a parent. But first and foremost is what's in the best interest of the child, their safety, their stability, permanency, and their well-being. We also realized and discussed that legal grounds must be proven. The court cannot terminate parental rights without clear and convincing evidence that a parent isn't able to safely care for their child. So the division has the burden of proof to say to the courts that based on these factors and these elements, you should grant our request to have the parental rights of this parent or parents terminated. DCP&P must also show that they made reasonable efforts to help the parent reunify and rectify the issue that led to DCP&P's involvement and the removal prior to seeking TPR. And like in most cases with court especially, timing matters. Courts balance giving parents a chance or chances to address issues with the child's need for permanency. So, for example, a parent may say, I just want more time or I need more time. But then DCP&P, the law guardian, may say, well, this child has a right to have permanency and not be involved with DCP&P and lawyers in the court for their entire childhood. So delays, right, can be harmful to both the parent and to the child in different ways. So timing plays a huge role. So we discussed when TPR happens, how it happens, why it is put into place in the first place, and the complaint that's filed, and how that process works. But what happens after TPR? Unfortunately, when a TPR petition is filed, there's a possibility that the court may grant DCP&P's request to terminate parental rights. So what happens after TPR is granted by the court? Well, I just want to let you first of all know that you have the right to appeal that decision. I've had situations where, only actually one situation where we did an appeal for a TPR. Fortunately, I discussed last episode too a bit about this, is that being that TPR is, I would say, more of a rare occasion than it had been in the past. Different standards, different procedures. Courts have a more, maybe even you might call it a protocol to do what they can do to prevent this from happening for parents, and DCP&P seems to be less apt to file petitions. Again, there are different permanency plans, and if a different plan can be put into place for whatever reason, and we can avoid TPR, that's really what should be the goal, to avoid TPR at all costs, unless we just can't, or DCP&P can't avoid that. So once parental rights are terminated, the child or children are legally freed for a permanency plan. And the biggest plan that happens after TPR is even part of the initial plan. When they file for this, they being DCP&P, it'll say TPR to adoption. So the purpose of terminating parental rights are to free that child or those children for adoption. Because as you might imagine, someone can't adopt a child who is still legally the child of another parent. So the adoption process can't begin until the parental rights are terminated. And so typically the outcome of a TPR is that child is now going to be adopted. And that could be with a resource home, a foster parent, someone that they were adopted or related to or are related to. So it could be a number of different people in different ways. And as you might imagine, right, for example, if a case is open in court for 1, 2, 3, however many years, a child is in placement during that time in these kind of cases oftentimes, right? Because that's why I get the TPR in this plan. A lot of times the goal is to hopefully have that child remain in that person's care they've been in for 1, 2, 3 years, whatever else it may be. And so it could be the resource parent, or it could be a different placement option. Another potential outcome after TPR is that the child is in some sort of planned permanent living arrangement. Now, it is less common for sure, but it could be used for a child who is disabled, older youth who may not just be adopted. Unfortunately, sometimes when a child is 16 years old and goes through this situation with the family and they're not up for, available for adoption or free to be adopted, perhaps that child, unfortunately, is less prone to being adopted because they're already 18. People want to adopt a younger child, perhaps, to have more time with them and for different factors that play into those decisions. So perhaps this is a plan to allow that child who is nearing adulthood, being 18, to have stability and support systems. And these are two of the primary outcomes in terms of a TPR case. And again, the biggest one is adoption. But, you know, unfortunately, a lot of times you have a child who the parents, their rights have been terminated, and the child could be in division's care or guardianship indefinitely. I mean, the system in that sense, DCP&P tells the court, terminate the parental rights because we want this child to have stability and permanency. But the truth is that after TPR, there are still steps that have to happen to have that child have stability and permanency. And sometimes those steps never happen. I have several examples where I've had individuals who either had a child in their care as placement, knew of a child in DCP&P's care, custody, or guardianship, and were like, no, this child's been in DCP&P's care for 6, 7, 8+ years, and there's not yet been stability or permanency. I had a situation where a client of mine had a child in her care. That child was placed somewhere else. The parental rights were terminated, and this child was not the client's child. And the child had not yet been adopted many years later. And my client was devastated that she was willing and able to care for this child several years ago, and DCP&P decided to go elsewhere because they wanted permanency. And parental rights are terminated. We'll provide permanency somewhere else now. With a person of our choosing. And now here we are. It's been 7+ years or so, I believe, and this child has yet to be provided with permanency, stability. And so it might sound like a great idea. Okay, Judge, DCP&P says that we have to terminate parental rights because without doing so, this child will never have permanency, never have stability or consistency. And while that might be somewhat true, perhaps the parent is in no way, shape, or form able to care for that child, you give up at a point because the hope of what could come, there's this idea, someone else would care for the child full-time and adopt them, doesn't always happen. I have another situation where a child, TPR happened and the parents actually passed away after that. This child has disabilities, and this child is older and was placed in assisted living, you could call it. And this child has yet to be adopted, even though people have come to the table to adopt this child. There was a TPR trial, and now she's free to have stability and permanency, to have a good home. And here are two cases where, despite the promise, kind of the facade of, TPR has to happen to provide stability, that argument from DCP&P, it never came to fruition. Okay, TPR was granted and this child's free for adoption, yet here we are 5+ years later on two separate occasions where those two children have yet to be provided with stability, have yet to be provided with permanency and a home. And so it might sound like, okay, this can happen and there can be permanency if the court would just grant TPR, but it doesn't always happen. So the system is flawed in that way. There's no guarantee that because a child can be adopted, that he or she will. And another kind of flaw is it's not even because no one's willing to. Just think of the idea that once TPR happens, DCP&P kind of has the control of the child's in their custody and their guardianship. They choose what's in that child's best interest for placement. So there could be several people who are saying, I'm willing and able to, but DCP&P may say, we don't think you're fit, or we're going to rule you out because of a past DCP&P situation. We're going to rule you out because we just can, or your home didn't pass our test, which has, it's subjective, right? There may be things you have to do, but it's still a person who does the inspection. They can be subjective in what they say is good enough and what's not good enough. And so it's not always about because no one wanted to adopt a child, which that happens too, right? Perhaps no one even came to the plate to say, I'm willing and able to do it. But the cases I mentioned, people were willing and able to do so. And those children still have not been adopted. The goal is permanency, right? DCP&P, Division of Child Protection and Permanency. So the idea of permanency and stability in DCP&P's name, you have a permanency hearing. That's the court's goal as well. And of course, as we mentioned, one of the goals can be TPR. But even with TPR, there's no guarantee that there will really be an actual permanency plan. You may be in limbo and in waiting for many, many years, if not through adulthood. And so there is the issue of perhaps, well, if the division or court never terminated parental rights, that parent could have gotten better by now. That parent could have overcome their substance abuse issues or done services by now. So you terminate parental rights because they took too long and you want a child to have permanency. Yet here we are X amount of years later and there's still no permanency. So why terminate rights and then there actually be no ending to the case, right? So it's almost like you have to weigh the options there and pros and cons of that. But it's a flawed system because, okay, why can't that parent who maybe 5 years later is more fit now? Why couldn't that have been perhaps a plan at that point? Because the child's really in waiting for perpetuity, it seems like. And so that's a big issue, right? Because TPR is put into place to lead to permanency and adoption, but that doesn't always actually come to fruition. There are times where, again, no one is there to adopt, or the person who said they were going to backs out, or DCPP rules everybody out. And so there still is no guarantee after going through all that process of a TPR trial and the petitions and the hearings, there still isn't a guarantee that that child will be provided with stability or permanency. So I've seen it firsthand, a couple of examples. And again, really good thing is TPRs are rare overall. Parents have a lot of chances and removals, even that, we try to keep them as low as possible. The state, the division, if they can, the burden is high to have that happen once you are in court. And so even more so, once you do the removal and the TPR is even more difficult, right? It's time and resources and hearings and trials. And so fortunately, TPR overall is a small percentage of cases. And the ones that don't lead to perhaps a somewhat happy ending for a child, stability, permanency, or even lower. But still, it's not a guarantee. There's no guarantee that even with TPR, that child will find another home or a good home or find permanency. So there should be an option really for a parent to come back and say, I fixed my issues now and I want to have my child back in my care post TPR without even appealing it. But a lot of times situations in those cases, DCP&B will say, oh, well, we're in charge now. We are the ones who have custody or guardianship and we choose who is an option, who is a possible placement or adoptive parent for this child. I know it's a very heavy topic when you have TPR and even you think about TPR and, good for that child, they can have stability somewhere, which is not always the case. So I know it's a heavy topic to discuss, but I do want to thank everyone for tuning in and for listening and for learning. As we discussed today, kind of part 2 of what TPR is, what happens post TPR. Hopefully it'll be adoption or some sort of planned permanent living arrangement. But even then, not always the case. Sometimes children are kind of held in a position where they don't find that. So it can be difficult for children, and the state may say it's tough for them too, but I've argued it many times where I'm saying, hey, someone's here willing and able to care for the child, and they seem to be fit enough, so why are they being ruled out? And the division tries to wield its power and authority, but there are ways around it. Right? That's why we have the reputation for taking unusual methods, perhaps, or little unknown methods, or not well-known methods, and trying to figure out a way to get through that and to have a child find permanency where they don't have it, or have a family member or someone who's not a family member somehow get custody or fight for that. So you keep pushing, keep trying. And so until that child is somewhere safe and permanent, then it's really in everyone's best interest to try and find a way to make that happen. So as always, if you're listening and you want to have any more information, we have resources, support on our website. Subscribe to the channel and share the podcast episodes, this one and prior ones as well, just to help people be informed, to have knowledge, and so that if you or someone you know finds themselves in a position where DCP is at their door, or you find yourself in court with DCP or in a specific kind of hearing, whether it be a fact finding or TPR, you have some knowledge to work with and you know the resources and who to reach out to obtain the help that you need. You might have a plan in place, but does that plan actually happen? So talk about that next week. and get into that very deep, somewhat confusing topic and trying to give you knowledge about how that works as well. But until then, have a great week, and we'll chat soon.